Welcome to Picking Teams, a podcast that dives into the playbooks of seasoned coaches. I'm your host, Amy Bryant, a 23-year veteran college coach, and my guests hail from the professional, college, and youth ranks. Together, we'll share real stories from our coaching experiences to empower you as parents to be positive forces in your child's sports journey. All right. Our guest today is David Harbin. David is the Assistant Director of Activities and Athletics at Decatur High School in Decatur, Georgia. He's a certified athletic administrator and serves on the board of the Georgia Athletic Directors Association. Prior to becoming a full-time athletic director, David taught middle school social studies and coached high school and middle school soccer and basketball, working primarily as the boys varsity soccer coach for 8 years. His team competed in multiple Final Fours and won the 2016 state championship. He was recognized by the National Soccer Coaches Association of America as the Small School Coach of the Year for the Southern region of the U.S. In college, David played soccer for Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Welcome to the podcast, David. It's great to have you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to hopefully share some insights. I have been an avid listener, believe it or not, to the podcast since it started, and have really used it as a professional development resource, honestly. Part of my job as an athletic director now is not only to support coaches, but also to support parents and help them to navigate this student athlete experience. And I think your podcast is doing a great job of pulling people from different elements of that industry and giving good advice. So hopefully I can add to that. But if not, I'm going to continue listening so I can learn.
Well, thanks, David. I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear that somebody's listening out there.
Yeah, one fan at least.
Great. So you started, you're obviously an avid soccer player growing up, and you played in college and then wound up coaching high school. Tell me about that journey.
Yeah, I was a kid that, my parents say was never interested in trucks or drawing or anything. It was just whatever. If they could put a ball in my hand, then I was all into it. And so was always interested in playing different sports and was given the opportunity to play soccer at Winthrop University, which was a great experience that I'm very grateful for. And while I was there, I was trying to figure out what my next step is and really had no idea, and dabbled in a couple different majors. I actually was a business major. Ironically, I was a sports management major and dropped out of that. And ended up being a psychology major. Came back to Decatur High School and had a conversation with my basketball coach, who was also our athletic director at the time, Carter Wilson, and basically said, how do I do what you do? I love sports. I've always been around sports, and you get to be around sports as a job. What does that look like? And his advice was, if you want to coach and you want to be in athletic administration, you start off as a teacher. And I, at the time, didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I definitely knew I did not want to be a teacher. And through some convincing, that wasn't hard, I did decide to follow that path. And at the time, Emory University had a Master's of Arts in Teaching. That was an accelerated program. That was a 1-year certification program and master's program that I graduated from Winthrop, immediately got into that program, was able to do some student teaching here at Decatur High School, and then was fortunate enough to be hired to teach social studies at the middle school. And I immediately was jumping in and started coaching basketball, actually, before transitioning over to become the head coach of the boys soccer program.
Wow. And you had a lot of success as the head coach of the boys soccer program.
Yeah, we were really fortunate to be successful, and we'll hopefully get into what success means.
Absolutely.
But certainly we were able to, as you kind of mentioned, play in a few Final Fours and won a state championship in 2016. I was a coach for 8 years and moved into this full-time assistant athletic director role 5 years ago, and it just became too difficult to support all of the coaches that I was responsible for supporting, and also coach a team, and found an opportunity to transition. But I miss coaching a lot for various reasons.
Yeah, tell us about those reasons. I'm always curious. I mean, this is me personally, because I left coaching a couple of years ago. So what is it that you miss? Because I'm not missing it.
Well, I'm surprised to hear that, honestly.
I mean, I love coaches. I love what I accomplish. I love the coaches that I communicate with, but I felt like my time was done for sure. But I always love hearing, from others. I think for me, it's the relationships that I miss more than anything else. But I'm always curious to hear what else is out there that's missed.
Yeah, well, that is my answer. I went from being a middle school social studies teacher for 12 years, where I had a class. I had 100 to 125 middle schoolers that I saw every day. I was never one of those teachers that got really excited about the content. I liked teaching, but what I liked about teaching social studies especially is it allowed for conversations. You get to know the kids. But my favorite part of teaching was homeroom and walking to lunch, because I got to talk to the kids about what they did that weekend and what they're interested in, and their musical performances and their baseball games. And so I miss that about teaching. And I miss the same thing with coaching soccer. I have a lot of great memories and a lot, really, a list of favorite moments. And so many of them are just about being around the kids. I do know, and I say all the time, there are not many people who are more competitive than I am. And I do miss being on the sidelines and being able to feel like I have an impact on a game. It's difficult for me to go to a soccer game now and just watch, because I want to be a step closer. Being on the sideline and being a step behind the bench are two very different positions. And I miss that competitiveness for sure. But more than anything, it's just spending time around kids and getting to know them as people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally get that. One thing I want to ask you about, and you and I have talked about this in the past, your experience at Winthrop, because I know that, you had a unique experience going there. You were a walk-on, which is not the most common way to get on a team these days. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, my experience, I think, was very unique. I was interested in continuing to play soccer, but honestly wasn't sure if I was good enough, and really had no way of gauging. There were some people who told me that I definitely should be pursuing that option. And so I did. And back then we were making highlight tapes on the VHS and sending that out to coaches and traveling around and visiting, but just never really gained a whole lot of traction. There were some schools that did offer me opportunities to play, but they weren't schools that I necessarily saw myself at. And so I had narrowed my school choices down to either going to Winthrop as a student. I had some older friends who had gone and they had enjoyed the school. And there was a lot about the school that I thought would be a good fit for me. And then I was going to go to the University of Georgia, because that's just sort of was the default at the time,
Right.
Which would have been great. And actually I went to Winthrop to visit as a student, and we went to visit the coach, Rich Posapenko at the time, and just to ask, about the program and what the opportunities were to walk on. And we, got the standard. We do offer walk-on tryouts in the spring. If you come as a student, we may or may not have opportunities, but you're welcome to try out. And it was a, thank you for the conversation. And we left and got home and went to lunch at school the next day. My club coach's daughter was a classmate of mine, and she came and congratulated me because Winthrop wanted me to play soccer there. And I said, I'm pretty sure you're mistaken. I just left the coach 2 days ago and he didn't know who I was. And, kind of jumping ahead, he at the time didn't know who I was, but just fortuitously, the goalie coach walked in an hour later, asked, who had been visiting, mentioned my name. It rang a bell in his head. He had seen me play somewhere. I think the same day they found out that a JUCO transfer had not made the grades. And sure enough, they called me that night and said, hey, here's sort of what happened. And if you're interested, we'll give you a preferred walk-on spot with no scholarship. But if you want to play, you can play. And again, I was already thinking about going as a student, and it kind of fell into my lap, and it worked out really well. And I did have a great experience. I loved being an athlete there, but kind of a unique story. And my takeaway for that, for student athletes now, is to just stay in the game. If it's something that you want to do, continue to reach out to coaches, continue to find out if there's an opportunity, because you never know what's going to happen. And it could have been that, we went on that visit and just didn't go visit the coach because I had sent them a highlight tape. We had told them where we were playing. They had never responded. Why would we go visit? But we went to visit and things fell in line. And I just know the recruitment process is really hard now. We do signing days with our kids. And one of the things that I mentioned at all of them is that everybody knows how hard it is to put yourself in a position to be recruited talent-wise, right? We know how hard you have to work. We know you got to sacrifice your social life. You got to wake up early and go to the weight room. You got to travel to do club. You got to do all those things. But what is not discussed and really isn't known unless you've been in the process is how brutal the recruitment process can be emotionally. You have to continue to be vulnerable. You have to continue to put yourself out there and say, hey, I want this, to very likely hear, well, we're not interested in you, over and over and over again, or we don't have an opportunity for you. And I think it's very easy for kids to convince themselves, you know what, I don't want that, because it's not that I don't want the opportunity, but I don't want the continued rejection. And so I just pull back, and you never know. So stay in the game, continue to be communicative, continue to let people know, and make good decisions. Don't put yourself in a school that you don't want to be at, but allow yourself to be uncomfortable, and hopefully it works out, but also know that maybe it won't, but you won't know if you don't stay in it.
That's right. That's so true. And that's, one of the major components to my coaching process with the student athletes that I work with now is coaching them on how to advocate for themselves and how to take those calculated risks by creating a target list of schools where they legitimately have a shot at playing, and not going after so much those reach schools where they don't have a shot. The schools that everyone wants to play at, your percentage chance of going there and getting recruited is so small, just like your percentage chance of getting into the most selective academic institutions is so small. It's the same thing for recruiting and for looking at those really competitive programs. So having a targeted list is really important, and that helps kind of reduce some of that risk, but also being able to manage that fear of failure is one of those things that I really work with my student athletes on now. So thank you for mentioning that. I also love that your story has this element of luck to it, because truly in the recruiting process, there often is just that, 4-leaf clover that kind of falls into your lap. Everything has to be aligned for that offer to come. And, whether it's a JUCO kid pulling out, or whether it's an injury that occurs, or whether it's a coaching change or something, you never know. Those, occurrences are frequent. And like you said, staying in the game and putting yourself out there is the only way to know if something's going to fall in your lap. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned in your introduction what success looks like. Let's get into that. in coaching basketball, in coaching soccer, and now as an athletic director where you oversee multiple sports, what characteristics do you see in the most successful athletes?
That's a great question, and I'm going to try to answer it without rambling. So rein me back in. But that's something that I think about a lot. And you asked, what is a successful athlete, which is reframing it a little bit from how I think about it. I think about it more of, what is a successful program? And I think both, I'll try to answer both. I think they are one and the same, but success can be measured by the scoreboard, and it is. Sports are competitive, and they're competitive for a reason. And because you are competing, there are a lot of lessons to learn through that competition. And so I think it is inevitable that coaches and students and parents pay attention to your time on the clock, what the scoreboard says, what your record is. Did you make it to the championship? Did you win? And those things are important, and they are good measures of success. But winning is not the only thing, and I would argue it's not the most important thing. I have a story I tell. My first year as a soccer coach, I took over the program, and we struggled. I actually ran into one of the seniors from that team, and he laughed about the challenges we had that season. We were 3-13. We could not win a game outside of teams that had players that just didn't play soccer. And as a new coach, I was really struggling with not being successful and not winning, and trying to find ways to push kids and raise their expectations. And the next year, we did that. We pushed them hard, and we believed that they were good. And we ended up actually making it to the Final Four, and we lost in penalty kicks, and it was just a brutal way to end. But as a coach, I thought, we've arrived. Like, we are successful. And I did a postseason evaluation with the players, and one player wrote back, and one of the questions was, did you think we had a successful season? And his answer was, on paper, yeah, I think we had a successful season. We went to the Final Four, of course. However, I was miserable the entire time and did not enjoy being a part of the team. And as a coach and as a teacher and as a person, that just completely transformed how I viewed what we were doing. And I knew at that point, it's like, we're going to try to continue to be successful, but we have to make this enjoyable, because if the kids are not having a good time, what are we doing? We're missing the mark on so many other different opportunities. And so we made some changes, made sure that practices were fun, made sure we were connecting with kids. We're just more thoughtful about our decisions, and not only how it impacted the team in the program, but also how it was going to impact every kid in the program. And I don't know if this is why, there's a lot of other reasons, but the next year we made it to the state championship and won in the finals. And so it's a good way to finish that story. But success, I guess, to come back to your question, it was not about winning the championship. It was about knowing that those kids were having a good experience. And really, the year before, we went to the Final Four, and I walked away feeling like a failure, because if the kids were not enjoying being a part of what we were building, that was not a win. So it reframed how I approach coaching and how I measure the success of a program.
So what did you do? What were the changes that you implemented from that first year when you got the bad review to the second year when everyone was engaged and loving the program? What were the major changes? And I ask this because I think this is an important thing for parents to keep an eye on with their children at any level, any age, to make sure that they're enjoying their experience, because that's what this is about. It's not about the end result and where your child ends up in college, whether your child plays pro or whatever. It's really about right now and whether or not they're having a good experience.
Yeah. Two things stand out. One, and this is small, but I do think it had a major impact, is we finished every practice with a joke of the day. So it didn't matter if we had a good practice or a bad practice. We had a joke. The rule for the joke of the day was this has to be a joke that you can tell, your 4-year-old sister, and you can tell your, 80-year-old grandmother, and they'll find it funny. So very much like Laffy Taffy style, silly jokes that were funny, but the funnier ones were probably not actually funny. And the way we did it was we, 2 coaches did the joke on the first day. After we told those jokes, we picked 1 player each, and their job was to go find a joke and bring it back to the next practice. And then they picked 2 more players. And it just really, again, left every day. I'm like, okay, I had a good practice, I had a bad practice, but everybody was hopefully smiling, right? And made sure that that was how we walked away. Another thing that we did was we were very punitive in my first couple of years. If you were late, then you were running. And if you were late, we all were running, because if you weren't here, that shows that you're not committed to the team. And you know what, there's going to be a consequence for that. And while I think that's important an important value to emphasize, we did a lot of running in my first year. And what I realized is the running wasn't solving the problem. If anything else, it was creating resentment amongst the players because their teammate was late. It was creating resentment with me because I was running them. And we took a different approach. If you were late, get dressed and get out here for practice, because you're an important part of this team. And we can't be as good as we need to be if you're not out here pushing your teammates. Now, there's a consequence. You're going to do something after practice, or you're going to do something before the next practice, because it is important that you're on time. But you are valuable to this team. We need you here. And I think that mindset shift changed their behavior. We went from running literally almost every practice my first 2 years because somebody was late, to maybe running we had 2 or 3 kids that would show up late because they knew it was important that they were going to be there. And then I think also creating a culture in the locker room where kids want to be there. They come into practice starts at 6:15. They're there at 5:45 just because they want to be in the locker room with their teammates, not because they're scared of the punishment from the coach, but I want to be a part of what's happening in here. I want to spend time, I want to catch up with my teammates. So just taking the emphasis away from consequences and punishment and putting it on how valuable you are to our team, whether you're the best player or you're one of our role players. We need you here to get better. So get dressed and get out here, and we'll handle that individually, separately.
Wow, that's really interesting and a great approach. And I'm really glad that the guys latched on to that new philosophy. When I was coaching, I definitely made them run for being late. But honestly, we didn't have quite, first of all, we had a smaller team. I coached tennis in college, right? So we had, maybe 12 kids on the team, and maybe one of them was late every 2 months. So it was hardly an issue. But also I think they didn't like running because I was pretty consistent with that as well.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to hear that you kind of shifted that mindset with the value piece. I hope that my players felt valued, even though I ran them. I'm definitely going to have a think on this later. But the joke of the day, I love that. I loved all the goofy stuff coaching. I think, making them realize that it's not all about performance. It's also about experience. That's huge. Do you remember any particular jokes of the day that you could share? Were there any good ones?
I'm so bad at this. The number of jokes that I had to tell and had written on a practice plan and that I heard, you would think I could pull one joke out. I think I fold under pressure.
No worries at all.
I will say another thing that we did do that we encourage our coaches to do now is we started what was called the Warrior Belt. And I will claim that this was before all of the, Division I football programs were handing out, the wrestling belts. We had a wrestling belt that was $9.99 from Amazon. It was a plastic, shiny little belt. But the Warrior Belt went to the player who was helping us to create a successful culture in our team. And the reason we did that is we knew, again, that our best players were always going to get recognition. The kids who scored the goal, the kids who started, people knew who they were. And we wanted to be intentional about giving credit to and recognizing those players who were doing all the other things that the scoreboard's never going to reflect. And so at the end of some practices, we would do a Warrior Belt at the end of every game, whether we won or lost, who was a player who was impactful. And it could be a player who scored 3 goals. And sometimes that is important to our success on the field. But other times we would have players recognized because they were on the sideline and didn't play 1 minute, but at halftime they were vocal with their teammates about what we needed to do. They were cheering on the sideline. Before the game, they were positive in the locker room. And it was things that we as coaches made sure we highlighted how important that stuff was. But the way that the Warrior Belt was given, sort of like the joke, we gave it out the first time. But if you were the recipient of the Warrior Belt, then your job the next time was you to give it out.
Yeah.
And so now it wasn't just us looking for those positive characteristics, but you have to be paying attention to your teammates. Which of your teammates are doing the things that represent the culture of the team that we've talked about, and you give it to them. And I think that changed their perspective as well of like, oh, coach just gives this award out. No, you're going to give the award out, and you have to think about who's doing the things that you appreciate. So we push that again, because you're always going to have the kids who are recognized for their talent and their skill, but be thoughtful about giving value to all the things that we know as coaches are intangible, that aren't going to necessarily be recognized. And kids don't know how important they are unless you put a spotlight on them and tell them.
I love that. I feel like you're giving a coaching masterclass on team culture right now. It's really good stuff. So we'll have to have you back on the show again to share some more insights with our parents, because truly you are a great source of information and support